right, guys, NFL Week 13 is here. Fantasy football starts and sits. Going to give you all the optimal place to start in each position, right? Every position broken down for you, giving you the best players to start and kind of warn you on some of the guys that have the tough matchups. Also going to give you guys some defense streamers. Now, I know a lot of people, guys, it's fantasy football playoff time in some leagues. For me, in this particular league, it's a $2,000 buy-in league. The playoffs start this week. So I'm one of the 4 teams. I finished 3rd in regards to rankings. You know, there's a couple 8-4 teams and 7-5. I'm actually 7-5, so I'm actually in 3rd place. So I've got a big matchup this week. And I got to tell you, man, starts and sits mean more than anything this week. You got to make the right decision. So I implore you guys to drop your questions below. I'll try to get to as many as I possibly can. If you guys need some extra help, patreon.com/FF Counselor. I've also linked it below, guys, for direct access. I cater to them before anybody, the Patreon groups, the Fantasy Front Lines Patreon group. So make sure you guys join below. Again, it's a big week, and I want to make sure you guys are set. So this episode is going to get you guys as set as possible, right? And I want to make sure that you guys are fully prepared. So make sure you guys get a pen, paper, and pay attention. Now, before we get into this, guys, check out this video of Travis Kelce. I'll let the video do the talking first, and I'll explain what this is all about. The final episode of the Truck It List is out today. Go check it out. It's out right now at Real Truck. Go check them out on Instagram in their bio at Real Truck right now. But watch this video, guys. Check out this amazing story.
I've always had a passion for shining light on local heroes, Craig Cummings being one of them. 28 years as a firefighter, and then on top of that, helping out the underserved youth. What happens when someone who's spent their whole life giving to others finally gets something in return?
We're handing these keys over to you.
Oh, wow. This is the story of unsung heroes, amazing trucks, and dreams that come true. I'm Travis Kelce, and this is the Truck It List.
Amazing, guys. As you can see, guys, real life heroes finally getting a reward, a big time reward. Their dream truck, brought to you by @RealTruck, and the truckitlist.com is where you got to see this. Kelce, Dak, Kittle. Check out all 3 episodes, guys, at the truckitlist.com, or head on over to @RealTruck's bio on Instagram to hear and watch these inspirational stories, these community heroes finally getting something amazing in return. That's their dream truck. So I watched them, and it's just great stories, and I want you guys to watch these pro athletes and at Real Truck give back to these, community heroes. Go check it out right now, all right? Of course, guys, subscribe, thumbs up, and drop your questions below here. I'm going to get to as many as possible. Let's start off with the quarterback position. We're talking NFL Week 13. I can't believe it's Week 13. We're talking starts and sits here. Got 15 games this week, Thursday running through Monday. Let's start off with the quarterback position. Now, I'm going to lay out here a visual, and as you can see here, guys, the 32 means, and it's green, means it's the easiest matchup versus position. See, it's green, and there's 32 teams. That means if it's green, means go, means that they've got a great matchup. So theoretically, on paper, this is predicated on matchup. Trevor Lawrence has got a good matchup. As you can see, guys, 32 green, 32 teams, and it's green, which means he is the number 1 matchup according to this, this platform that I'm using. Now, if it's a 1 and a red, it means it's the toughest matchup versus position. If it's red being stopped. But that being said, particularly for this week, guys, when you're looking at starts and sits for your Week 13, start your consistent players. That's one thing I look at. Who's been consistent week in, week out? Those are the ones you want to start. At this point in the game, you should have yourself an optimal roster. You should know who your starters are this late in the game. It shouldn't be that hard. I mean, you may be torn between 1 or 2 players, and that's fine, right? But make a decision based on matchup and based on how consistent they are. So if you're torn, maybe the right matchup will make the right decision. So quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert. Now, a lot of people were down on Justin Herbert. He's been really pulling through down the stretch for me as a Herbert owner, and it's been amazing. Him and Henry have been really carrying my team. I'm really excited about it. That's why I'm in the playoffs, right? Those 2 guys have been anchors for me, right? So Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, arguably the 2 best matchups versus position. Jimmy Garoppolo, he's been pretty solid. Had 13 points last week, 25 the week before. Jimmy G, good matchup versus Miami. Jalen Hurts is money. Great matchup versus Tennessee this week. Mike White, interesting streamer quarterback. Also a good DFS value play here. Mike White coming off 149 passer rating, 28 points plus last week. Mike White versus Minnesota is actually set up for a good matchup again. Could be interesting to see how this young kid does. Jared Goff, Marcus Mariota, Joe Burrow, Kenny Pickett, who's been mediocre at best, coming off a 12-point week last week. has a good matchup this week. Now, other guys that mid-range matchups you may want to consider, obviously, if you've got Aaron Rodgers, you don't have a better option. He's got a mid-range matchup versus Chicago. Daniel Jones been safe. Tom Brady, Derek Carr has been solid. All mid-range matchups. Josh Allen, a lot of people asking me, like, do I start Josh Allen? Do I start like a Trevor Lawrence? This is a decision you got to make on your own. Josh Allen is as consistent as they come. 2 weeks ago, he had a 13-point game and has the 12th hardest matchup versus New England. It's not going to be a walk in the park for Josh Allen. Trevor Lawrence upside seems a little more appealing. That's a decision you have to make, predicated on matchup, okay? And just so you know, guys, some big names here: Ryan Tannehill, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, who should get a start, Pat Mahomes, Matt Ryan, and Tua, all tougher matchups versus position. Again, be aware of that. Mahomes has the 4th hardest matchup versus position against Cincy's secondary. Lamar versus Denver secondary. On paper, a tough matchup, and if you play Deshaun Watson against Houston secondary, relatively tough, but could be a good play for DFS if he gets the start, all right? Now, moving on to running back. Who is optimal this week? Again, with running back, very scarce position. You want to definitely start your guys that have been consistent week in and week out. So, again, Nick Chubb, great matchup. Dameon Pierce coming off a terrible couple weeks. Obviously, Houston's offense has been suspect, to say the least. With the quarterback change, he hasn't done much better than Davis Mills. But Dameon Pierce does actually have a good matchup. I'm actually in debate this week as starting him. I've got a 2-flex league, and in there currently I've got Drake London and Dameon Pierce as my 2 flexes. I am, questioning how well they'll do at the flex position, but Dameon Pierce on paper has a good matchup. Should be interesting to see how this fizzles out this week. Hopefully a bounce back week for Dameon Pierce. Josh Jacobs coming off a super hot 50-point week versus the Chargers rush defense. Crap defense. Great matchup. Obviously must start. Cam Akers banged up, so any Rams running back, whoever you decide to start there. Again, good matchup versus position this week either way versus Seattle. Just note that. David Montgomery, great matchup coming off a 14-point week. With Fields there, though, I'm wondering how much rushing he's going to get. Be aware, but does have a good matchup. Aaron Jones was a little banged up. Be cautious with him. Just check the injury status with him, but he should be good if he is. Great matchup. Eckler, great matchup, consistent as they come. Najee Harris was banged up. I think he should be good to go this week. Something to watch. 11 points the last time he was out. Again, coming off that huge week 2 weeks ago. Then again, he got banged up last week. Again, it didn't seem too serious. Should be good to go. Does have a good matchup. Brian Robinson, who's been hot, had a hot week last week. Definitely worth a start this week versus the Giants. Derrick Henry, great matchup. I need him this week. Travis Etienne should be good to go. Make sure you monitor that situation. Hasty came in, had himself a good week. Etienne had 0.3 points last week. Crappy week. Be careful if you do start him. Make sure he's not limited. Watch that situation if you do have him. Zeke Elliott's been safe. Mid-range matchup. Same with Jamal Williams, who's been a touchdown king. Has himself also a mid-range matchup, all right? Now, also, if you're wondering if Joe Mixon, if you have Samaj Perine, start him if Mixon sits. Joe Mixon was limited in practice. Be careful, monitor that situation at game time. Now, ironically, I'm actually playing a guy who's starting Samaj Perine in his flex position, and I've got Mixon on my bench right now. This is a playoff potential game here, first round of playoffs in one league, the $2,000 blind league. So as of right now, I'm hoping that Mixon does get a full start, and then he gets to sit Perine, and I get to start Mixon. So it's going to be interesting to see how that fizzles out, because I'm the Mixon owner, he's the Perine owner. But either way, I've got Henry and Kenneth Walker plugged in as my RB1 and RB2, but it'd be nice to flex Mixon as a starter for that roster, all right? Now, if you guys are wondering about Kenneth Walker, 8th hardest matchup versus position, I'm still starting him. Christian McCaffrey, 9th hardest matchup versus position, still got to start him. Saquon Barkley, 6th hardest matchup versus position, I'm still going to start him if you've got him, right? I don't have him in this particular league, but Saquon Barkley, obviously got to start him. Miles Sanders, definitely coming off a hot week. Tough matchup, though. All these guys. Jeff Wilson, hardest matchup versus position versus San Fran. A lot of people asking, do you start him? I mean, we're talking playoff time. We're talking a guy that's going to get the volume, but he does have a tough matchup. So Jeff Wilson, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, all these guys that have big names, right? Dalvin Cook, 11th hardest matchup versus position, have relatively tougher matchups versus position. Jonathan Taylor, 7th hardest matchup versus position. You got to start them still. I mean, who else are you going to start over them? Running back is such a slim position. You got to start them. But again, I give you guys the optimal guys. Your Chubbs, your Dameon, your David Montgomerys, your Aaron Jones, your Austin Eckler's, your Najee's, your Henrys. have those optimal matchups. So again, you got to make executive decisions here. Moving on to the wide receiver position. Again, a lot of uncertainty at this position. A lot of guys starting to emerge, including the guy I was talking about back in May, Christian Watson. But let's talk about the guys that have optimal matchups. You know, Drake London has been inconsistent. I have to, again, the reason I'm starting him in my flex play, potentially, I'm still debating on it, is because he's got a great matchup for his position and Kyle Pitts is out. Drake London could be an appealing play versus Pittsburgh secondary that absolutely sucks. Drake London, optimal matchup. Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, great matchup versus position. Deontay Johnson, who's been mediocre at best, both him and Pickens do actually have a good matchup this week. Be aware of that. Christian Kirk, Zay Jones was the beneficiary last week. Great week. They've actually got a great matchup. So both those guys worth a start. Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore. Garrett Wilson coming alive last week. Great matchup versus position. Jamar Chase, check his injury. I don't think he's playing. If he is, I haven't even checked Jamar Chase. I think he is actually getting set to play again. But either way, if he plays, T. Higgins should be good to go. Again, check the last minute news and notes, right? I'm recording this on Thursday. Things may change as we get closer to the Sunday games, right, for most of these guys. Amon-Ra St. Brown, great matchup versus position, all right? Brandon Cooks, again, Nico Collins, great matchup, but I don't trust the quarterback situation there. Mike Evans, also a great matchup, all right? Godwin, Evans, good matchup. Godwin been pretty solid as of late the past 3 weeks. If you're debating on Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, I mean, Palmer's been consistent. They do have a pretty decent matchup, 12th easiest versus position, okay? Guys that have it in tough, just be aware. Jefferson coming off a hot week. He's been hit or miss lately. Good week this last week. The week before was a crap week. Good week the week before. He's been kind of hit, miss. Both him and Thielen do have a tough matchup this week, just so you note that. Fourth hardest versus position. Terry McLaurin, tough matchup. CeeDee Lamb. And just because I'm saying they have a tough matchup does not mean you got to sit them. I'm just telling you they got a tough matchup. Stephon Diggs coming off some hot weeks. Tough matchup. Sixth hardest versus position versus New England. Just be aware of that. Amari Cooper's been pretty consistent. He's got a tough matchup versus Houston secondary. Juju absolutely crap the past week. 7 points last week. Does have a tough matchup versus Cincy. And also, a lot of people ask about Treylon Burks, who's been safe and steady the past 2 weeks versus Philly secondary. 9th hardest versus position if you're thinking about Treylon Burks. Again, this might help you with a decision if you're torn between this guy and that guy. Devontae Adams, obviously, he's going to get the volume. Doesn't matter how hard his matchup is. 10th hardest versus position. Does actually have a tough matchup. But again, how do you sit Devontae Adams? You just don't. Deebo Samuel has been banged up. Be cautious there. But either way, 49ers wide receivers do have a mid-range matchup versus Miami. Be aware. Christian Watson, I'm definitely starting him in a league as my second wide receiver. Has been consistent the past 3 weeks. His rapport is now built up with whatever quarterback is throwing to him. Does have a mid-range matchup. Be aware. Same with Michael Pittman and Chris Olave and DK Metcalf, all mid-range matchups. All right, guys, make executive decisions. But like I said, the guys that have the great matchups are your A.J. Browns, your Drake Londons, your George Pickens, your Christian Kirks, your Garrett Wilsons, and your Bengals receivers. All right, so again, make mental notes and, start and sit accordingly. Again, drop your questions below if you have them, all right? Let's go to the tight ends. I'm going to give you guys some defense streamers. Before I do, again, make sure you guys head on over to, this is very important, prizepicks.com. Use code DFSLine. They'll double your first deposit up to $100. Enhance that game-watching experience. That's where I play DFS. Go prizepicks.com. DFSLine is the code for all the perks upon sign-up. Prizepicks.com. DFS line. Go try this platform. You just simply select more or less, parlay 2 to 5 players, and it's easier to win. I love playing it. It makes the games more fun. Prizepicks.com, DFS line. Go try it. All right, tight ends. Who's got it in good? Again, tight ends. I say this all the time. I sound like a broken record, but that's okay. Start a consistent tight end that's going to get you 10 points. You'll be happy. A very inconsistent, volatile position, but guys that have good matchups, just going to rhyme this off here. Higbee, Kittle, Ingram, who's been inconsistent. Man, I don't trust him, but he does have a good matchup this week. Dawson Knox, mediocre week last week. Good matchup this week. Logan Thomas, crappy week last time he played. Gerald Everett, again, been mediocre at best, but Gerald Everett, Thomas, Dawson Knox, Evan Ingram, George Kittle, Higbee, even Tyler Conklin and Foster Moreau, all good matchups versus position. David Njoku, decent matchup versus position as well. But if you do have a Kelsey, you don't sit him. If you do have a Hawkinson, you don't sit him, right? If you do have a Gesicki, he sucks. You may want to sit him. He's actually got the 5th hardest matchup versus position. Hunter Henry, 3rd hardest matchup versus position versus Buffalo. Be aware. Jelani Woods had himself a good game, 18 points last week, but does have it in tough versus Dallas. be aware, and Cameron Brate does have it in tough if you're looking at starting a Tampa Bay tight end this week, all right? Dalton Schultz, mid-range matchup if you're interested in him. But again, start your tight end that's been consistent. Not that there's been many, but just make sure you try to get 10 points out of your tight end. You just want to fill that spot on your roster, right? Let's talk about some streamers at the defense position now. Some of these offenses have been stepping up. For example, I like Green Bay as a streaming defense. The rankings that I've got here based on matchups are predicated on the entire year. Now, again, some defenses and offenses have changed as the year, moved and progressed forward, including the Bears offense stepping it up a little bit, just to give you a quick example. But Seahawks versus Rams, I like this matchup here. Again, Seahawks defense hasn't been the greatest, but if you need a streaming defense, Seahawks, Cowboys, I mean, that team is probably taken anyway. Someone probably owns the Cowboys, but I think I like them versus Indy this week. The Browns versus Houston's interesting. Not the greatest defense, but the matchup could be optimal on a struggling Houston defense, Houston offense, unless Dameon Pierce absolutely tears it up, and he's got a good matchup to do so. Browns could be an interesting streaming defense. Packers, versus Chicago. Be careful there, obviously. Tampa Bay versus the Saints, Ravens versus Denver, Falcons versus Pittsburgh, the struggling Pittsburgh offense, boom or bust. And Buffalo, I've got them in my year long anyway, so that they've been an anchor for me. Giants versus Washington, also another good option there for streaming defenses. But again, try to take a look at the matchups and make the best possible decision. Now, if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys do subscribe. Join the Patreon group, patreon.com/FF Council for direct access to get you guys that championship win. And make sure you guys are subscribed. All right, guys, I appreciate you. Thumbs up. And again, go to thetruckitlist.com and watch those episodes. We'll talk soon, guys. I'm out.